Last week, we talked all about what is wedding planning burnout, what are the signs and symptoms. So, if you haven't tuned into that one yet, I highly recommend it. It'll help you assess if you might be suffering with wedding planning burnout. Today, we're going to be talking about how to prevent wedding planning burnout. Whether you're feeling it already or you're just nervous you might go down that path, today we'll talk about 5 high-level strategies for preventing and reversing wedding planning burnout. So again, these are high-level strategies we're going to be talking about. So for each one, we could probably drill into these all day long and get really, really nuanced with how to do them. We're not going to go there today. We're going to be just talking about things to be keeping in mind during your wedding planning and engagement journey and making sure you're incorporating some of these aspects into your mindset. Tune into all of our stuff because essentially a lot of the content that we're providing weekly is more drilled down into exact tools and frameworks for how to do these things. So make sure that you follow us on Instagram, that you're subscribed to our newsletter and all of that good stuff if you want more specifics on how to sort of engage with these tactics more specifically. So the reason why we're even talking about this is because I feel like no one talks about taking care of yourself emotionally during wedding planning and engagement. Last week, I mentioned that there's this idea that you get engaged and it's just really fun and really exciting, and then you just plan a wedding and it's like the logistics are stressful, but it's so much joy, and then boom, you're married. And that is literally 0% how it actually goes. There are so many emotional factors. There are interpersonal and relationship factors. There's your own identity shifting going on. So the emotional aspects of wedding planning are hardly ever talked about, definitely not talked about in enough detail, and it can really lead to us not knowing what the hell is going on. So the number one recommendation for how to prevent wedding planning burnout is upping your self-care is essential. It is essential. And no one has ever said that to me when I was engaged. But prioritizing self-care actually over wedding planning is the most important thing to do. Now, I know it feels like everything is time sensitive. Like there's just so many details to work out and decisions to make constantly. I know, I've been there. It really does feel that way. That is a lie, 100%, because you're going to have a wedding. You're going to get there. Whether you make these decisions today, tomorrow, next week, or next month, I promise you they're not going to matter at the end of the day. What will matter is if you've worked yourself to death and stressed out so much that you haven't had time to care for yourself. So I know that feeling of like, there's so much to do and I just want to do it, and I'm on my Pinterest and all of that, and like I can do yoga tomorrow or next week. Do the yoga now and spend one last hour on your Pinterest board. I promise it will help. So not only am I asking you to prioritize your self-care, but I'm telling you, you should be scheduling it in. You should be making time for it. You should look at the week ahead and say to yourself, how am I going to make sure I'm taking care of myself every single day? And making sure that wedding planning is never coming before self-care. Never. I know it's probably a very provocative statement, but I'm serious about it. Okay, strategy number 2 for preventing and reversing wedding planning burnout. It's so important to do some real reflection and soul searching on why you are stressed exactly. I think it's very common for people to get so swept up in the planning that we're not paying attention to feelings and emotions, thoughts that are happening underneath the surface that are actually the problem, the root of our stress. Sometimes we can use wedding planning actually as a way to take us away from our feelings about being engaged and planning a wedding. And so, what I'm inviting you to do today is, no matter how you're doing in this process, whether you're experiencing wedding planning burnout or not, to invite in some deep reflection. What are the feelings that are coming up as I walk down this path towards marriage? What are the feelings about me, about my fiance, about my life changing, about the family I'm marrying into, about how people are treating me, all of it. If the stress is coming from managing people's expectations, if it's coming from the pressure of putting on a perfect wedding, if it's coming from looking perfectly bridal on your wedding day, I invite you to get really clear about what is it exactly that I'm stressed about and why. Is that something that is sort of typical for me? Is there something about this stressor that makes sense given what I know about myself? Or is this out of character? And do I need to take on whatever it is, that thing underneath? Do I need to take that on? Is that just sort of something I'm operating automatically on that I can question a little bit more deeply? So if the pressure is coming from, I need to have a Pinterest-worthy wedding, and I haven't fully vetted, I'm acting as if I have to have a Pinterest-worthy wedding, but can I interrogate that assumption a little bit more? Can I debunk that notion for myself? Can I challenge myself to think about it differently? So it's a really good time to get really clear with yourself. Why am I stressed? And is it necessary? Can I do something about it? Thing number 3, tactic or strategy number 3 for how to prevent wedding planning burnout. Evaluate, that's not a word. Evaluate and reset your priorities. So this is sort of related. You will often come to step 3 after having done step 2. So that's why it's really important to do this in order. But evaluate, what am I putting the most importance on during this process? And does that feel right to me, given my values, given the priorities in my life? So if you find in step 2 that I'm so stressed about having a Pinterest-worthy wedding, and that is why I'm experiencing wedding planning burnout, or one of the reasons, step 3 is then, gosh, does that have to be a priority? Can I let go of that, like 5%? Can I hold that is there for me, but purposefully question it and flip it? And then maybe find a different priority to focus my energy on, because the energy will still be there. Can I find a different priority to put that energy towards? Okay, I'm so stressed about having a Pinterest-worthy wedding, but I'm going to choose to not. I'm going to put that energy towards what? Towards throwing the most fun wedding that is so aligned with me and my husband's, soon-to-be husband or wife's, values. Or I'm going to put that energy towards really getting close with my mom during this time, or whatever it is. You can sort of interrogate the priority and flip it on its head. That's going to take work. I am certainly not saying that is easy to do, but it takes awareness and dedication, and you can do it. And by really getting clear about your priorities and returning to your values, you will be sort of insulating yourself from wedding planning burnout, because you'll be able to remember and remind yourself, oh yes, I'm doing this for this reason that I really believe in. Not for this reason that I think is actually sort of vapid and superficial. That will give you wedding planning burnout. So reset your priorities and constantly come back to them. Strategy 4 Manage other people's expectations, set boundaries, and delegate. So a lot of the pressure and burnout does indeed come from other humans, our in-laws, our moms, our friends, ourselves, feeling that everyone needs to be pleased. We need to act a certain way, all of these things, right? So managing other people's expectations and setting boundaries will free you up so much of your energy up to do other things. So how about this? Hey, Mom, I love that you are so enthusiastic about planning blah, 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 blah. I'm trying to set some limits with how much I'm engaged in wedding planning because it's getting a little bit too much. Would you mind just sending me one email every other day? That's really all I can take on right now. I would really appreciate it if you could do that. Would that work for you? Right? Oh my God, imagine that shift from a mom who's sending emails and texts constantly to like, actually, Mom, this isn't working for me. It's nothing to do with you. I just am setting some new limits for myself. Can you help me with that and get them on board? Delegation is so helpful. It can be so difficult for those of us who are very type A. I'm that way. I wanted to do everything myself, but it is a recipe for burnout. So the question is, how can I share some of the load? And to be honest, let go of it not being perfect. You can do that. You can say, I'm going to give this task to my husband to be, or my wife to be, or my spouse to be. And, I'm going to let them do it, and I'm going to let go of the result because ultimately it doesn't matter that much. I promise you it won't be. Unless it's like, burning down the wedding. But most of the time it won't be. Delegation can be hard, but really important. And then lastly, strategy 5 is to seek out supportive connections during your wedding planning and engagement journey. And I think this can be a hard one because I hear a lot that sometimes the people that you'd expect to be right there with you, like your number one people, aren't showing up like how you'd expect. And that can be disappointing. And sometimes it might feel like you can't talk to the people in your life, or you're worried you're talking too much about this with the people in your life. Pick a couple people that can be your confidants and lean on them. And if you don't have those people, seek them out. There are communities like Kinship Collaborative where brides-to-be and newlyweds-to-be get together and talk about these things. We have a group program for that. There are Facebook groups for that. There's one called Wedding Planning Club. There are communities of engaged people who come together and rely on each other and talk about the process. So if you don't have someone in your life that you feel like you can do that with, I promise you there are communities out there. You just need to find them. You can always send me a DM or a message, an email, elizabeth@kinshipcollaborative.org if you'd like to know more about that. And I think having supportive community during this time is essential for preventing wedding planning burnout, because knowing you're not alone and feeling camaraderie is one of the most healing things in life, I think. So there you have it. Those are our top 5 high-level strategies for preventing wedding planning burnout. I know we covered a lot, and I know that we didn't get to drill down deeply into each one, but that's what we're here for. We're coming up with tips and tools and tactics every day. So just make sure you're following along on Instagram @Kinship Collaborative. Make sure you're signed up for our newsletter for a lot more about how to. But I would encourage you to just start with the lowest hanging fruit. If there was one of those 5 that you felt like, oh, I could do that one, just do that one. Don't worry about doing them all. And even just doing one can really help moving the needle.